They called her defective. Her shimmering alien skin marked her as a failure, a shame to the Empire. Left abandoned in a cold lab, she shivered, waiting for the final order to end her life. But then, a human stepped through the door. His eyes didn't see a defect. They saw her glow, her trembling hope, her quiet strength. While others turned away in disgust, he knelt beside her and whispered, "I see a miracle." And in that moment, her entire world changed forever. They called her defective from the day she first opened her bright, starlit eyes. Her skin shimmered in gentle waves of pearlescent blue and violet, a living canvas that shifted under every breath and tremor of her small, fragile frame. In the Empire's breeding facilities, beauty and strength were prized above all: wings that gleamed like polished glass, eyes that burned like twin stars, and limbs honed to perfection. But she had none of these. Her wings were stunted and delicate, unable to hold her above the ground for more than a few faltering seconds. Her long, silken hair, while beautiful, was called a distraction, an unnecessary waste of nutrients. Her aura, a natural glow that the Empire believed should terrify enemies, flickered and faded whenever she grew frightened. The handlers looked at her with cold disdain, their metallic masks reflecting her quivering face back at her as if to say she did not deserve to exist. Every time she tried to speak, they silenced her with sharp clicks of their electric rods, teaching her that a defective had no voice, no right to plead. She huddled in the cold metal corner of her cell each night, staring at her trembling fingers and wondering what it meant to be alive. Other hybrids were trained daily in combat, performing gravity-defying acrobatics with majestic wings stretched to their limits. She could only watch through the reinforced glass, her small wings twitching helplessly as she imagined what it might feel like to soar above the clouds. The other girls sneered at her whenever they passed her enclosure. They flaunted their power, flaring their feathers and letting the handlers praise them. Once, one girl threw a piece of stale ration bar at her and hissed, "Why haven't they destroyed you yet? You shame all of us." She pressed her forehead to the cold glass wall, her breath fogging it up until she could barely see her own reflection. If she tried hard enough, she could imagine another version of herself, one with wide, glorious wings and fierce golden eyes, standing tall, defiant, worthy of song. But no matter how desperately she imagined, the truth always returned in cruel, biting waves. She was small, weak, and unworthy. The scientists labeled her with a code instead of a name, a string of numbers and letters etched onto the tag around her neck. She had stopped trying to read it long ago. It was easier to pretend she didn't exist at all. Her food came through a small slot at the bottom of her cell, flavorless gray mush that she forced down to stay alive. The days blended into each other, each one a bleak repetition of loneliness and echoing footsteps in the sterile hallways. Every so often, a new commander would inspect her cell, glancing over the data pads and muttering about wasted resources. Some suggested terminating her to make space for new experiments. She heard the word decommission so often that it began to echo in her dreams. One day, they simply stopped feeding her altogether. She lay curled on the cold floor, her glow now a faint glimmer that barely lit the shadows. Each breath rattled painfully in her chest, and she wondered if death would be quiet or if it would roar like the wind she had never felt on her wings. That was when the human arrived. Rumors of humans had trickled into her ears over the years, hushed whispers among handlers or scientists. They were called primitive by some, impossibly gentle by others. But she had never truly believed in them. The Empire's propaganda painted them as fragile, simple creatures who could never rival the perfection of the hybrid species. When the human entered, she barely raised her head. She expected another masked handler, another cold appraisal before the final injection. But instead, she heard a voice, soft, shaking, and strangely warm. "Hey, what's your name?" She struggled to focus her eyes, blinking at the figure standing beyond the transparent barrier. He was taller than she imagined, covered in simple, rough-textured clothing that looked strangely soft. His eyes were the deepest brown, like rich soil after rain, and they shone with something she had never seen before: kindness. He pressed a hand against the glass, and though she couldn't feel his warmth, she felt a sudden spark ignite inside her. She opened her mouth but no words came out. Her throat, unused to speech for so long, seized up painfully. Instead, she pressed her tiny hand against his, her glow flickering in tiny, frightened pulses. He didn't flinch. In fact, he smiled, a wide, gentle curve that sent warmth through her weakened limbs. "They said you were defective," he whispered, leaning closer so she could see the tiny lines around his eyes. "But I don't see that. I see someone who survived, someone strong." Her breath hitched. No one had ever called her strong. No one had ever looked at her without disgust or cold calculation. He returned every day after that first visit. Each time, he brought something new, a piece of fruit, a small flower, or simply a story from his life outside the facility. She listened, transfixed, as he described blue skies, green meadows, and rivers that glittered under sunlight. She imagined herself beside him, her feet sinking into cool grass, her wings stretching wide under an endless sky. He started teaching her words again, coaxing her to speak even if it hurt. Every syllable felt like shards in her throat at first, but he waited patiently, repeating sounds and encouraging her with gentle praise. Eventually, she croaked out her first word, glow. She didn't know why she chose that one, but he beamed so brightly that she felt her glow pulse stronger than it had in months. He decided to call her Glow from that day forward. With every visit, her strength returned little by little. The Empire's officials took notice but seemed amused rather than concerned. Let the human entertain himself, they sneered. She'll be gone soon enough. The human didn't care. He asked for her cell to be opened so she could learn to walk again. At first, her legs trembled so violently that she collapsed into his arms. Instead of scolding her or pushing her away, he simply held her close, letting her rest against his steady chest. His heartbeat was a deep, comforting drum, and she felt her glow brighten each time he whispered, "You're doing great." Days turned into weeks. Glow learned to speak in full sentences, each word precious and fragile like new petals. Her wings, though still stunted, grew stronger. She practiced flapping them inside the cell, lifting herself a few inches off the ground before falling into his arms, giggling breathlessly. The human laughed too, his eyes always locked on hers, encouraging her to try again and again. She began to dream at night, real dreams of flying, of feeling wind rush past her face, of laughter echoing among high clouds. And every dream ended the same way, with him standing below, arms open, cheering for her. One day, he arrived carrying a small bundle. She tilted her head, curious. He unwrapped it to reveal a simple dress, pale blue like the dawn sky he had described so many times. "For you," he said shyly, his cheeks pink. Her eyes widened, her glow bursting forth in brilliant waves that filled the entire cell with shimmering light. She had never owned clothes before. The Empire believed defective hybrids didn't deserve dignity or comfort. He helped her slip into it carefully, his fingers gentle and respectful. When she looked at her reflection in the polished metal wall, she barely recognized the girl staring back. She looked beautiful, whole, alive. That night, she pressed her forehead to the glass again, but this time she didn't see a sad, broken creature. She saw Glow, the name he had given her, the person he believed she could be. The next morning, alarms blared throughout the facility. Glow jolted awake to see guards rushing down the hallway, their weapons raised. Through the glass, she saw the human arguing with a superior officer, his face red with fury. He shouted words she didn't understand, but she felt the desperation in every syllable. Her heart pounded violently in her chest. Something was happening, something big. The human turned and pressed his palm against the glass one last time. His eyes, filled with determination and love, met hers. "I'll be back for you," he mouthed. And then he was gone, swallowed by the chaos in the hallway. Glow pressed her hand against the cold glass, her glow flickering wildly as tears streamed down her cheeks. She had never felt so alive, and never so terrified. Days passed with no sign of him. The guards kept her locked tight, ignoring her trembling questions. She refused to eat, refused to move, her glow slowly fading into a pale, sickly shimmer. One night, as she lay curled on the floor clutching the blue dress to her chest, she heard footsteps, slow, heavy, and deliberate. She looked up, expecting another guard, but there he stood. The human. Bruised, exhausted, but alive. He held a small device in his hand, the control for the cell door. Their eyes met, and her glow reignited with sudden brilliance. He pressed the button, and the door swung open for the first time in her life. She tried to run to him but stumbled forward, collapsing. He caught her before she hit the ground, pulling her into a fierce, shaking embrace. "I told you I'd come back," he breathed into her hair. She clung to him with every ounce of strength she had left, her glow washing over them both like moonlight. He scooped her up and carried her through the dark corridors, whispering soothing words as she sobbed into his neck. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp, but to Glow it felt like freedom. Stars stretched across the sky, endless and bright, and for the first time she realized how big the universe truly was. She turned her face to the wind, letting it wash over her fragile wings. He set her down gently, his hands steadying her. "Ready to fly?" he asked softly. Glow hesitated, her eyes wide with fear and wonder. She looked at her tiny wings, then back at him. He nodded, his smile unwavering. With trembling arms, she spread her wings. She took one step, then another, feeling the cold grass beneath her feet. She flapped once, twice, and then she rose into the air, her glow exploding in a shimmering trail behind her. He laughed and cheered below, his voice echoing in the night. And for the first time, Glow didn't feel defective. She felt powerful, radiant, unstoppable. She soared higher and higher, tears streaming down her cheeks, her heart beating in perfect rhythm with his. Down below, the human stood with arms outstretched, ready to catch her whenever she needed to land. But for now, she didn't want to come down. She was flying, and she knew deep in her soul that she would never be alone again. The night sky embraced her, 1,000 tiny stars blinking like distant, watchful eyes as she soared above the silent fields. Every beat of her small wings felt like a promise, a fragile but unstoppable vow that she would never again be caged. Below, she could still see him, the human who had risked everything for her. His arms were outstretched, as if he could catch her if she fell, but there was no fear in his gaze, only pride, only love. She dipped and turned, her glow spilling behind her like a comet's tail, lighting up the dark ground in ethereal blue and silver ribbons. Each time she looped lower, she saw his eyes glimmer, and her heart thudded with warmth stronger than any star's fire. Eventually, her wings began to tire, and she drifted down, her feet brushing against the dew-soaked grass. He rushed forward to meet her, catching her in his arms before she could stumble. They laughed together, a sound so pure and bright it seemed to echo into the sky. He pressed his forehead against hers, breathing hard. "You did it," he whispered, his voice shaking with awe. "You really flew." Her eyes glistened as she tried to steady her breath. "Because of you," she murmured. I'm alive because of you." She had never dared to say such words before. Under the Empire's cold control, even the idea of gratitude had felt like a dangerous luxury. Now the words felt like a key turning inside her, unlocking something deep and powerful. He shook his head slowly, his fingers brushing back a strand of her moonlit hair. "No, you were always alive. You just needed someone to see you." She felt her glow pulse at those words, spreading warmth into her fingertips and toes, all the way into her fragile wings. For a moment, she thought she might lift off the ground again, right there in his arms. But instead, she pressed herself closer, breathing in the scent of soil and sweat and safety. He helped her walk toward a small vehicle hidden beneath the trees. She glanced back once at the dark silhouette of the Empire's facility in the distance. The place where they had tried to crush her, where they had denied her a name, where they had labeled her defective. She didn't feel anger as she looked back, she felt release. That chapter was over. Inside the vehicle, he wrapped her in a thick blanket, carefully tucking it around her wings. The warmth soaked into her bones, and she shivered as if thawing from a lifetime of frost. He handed her a small container of sweet fruit. She hesitated at first, still half expecting a shock rod or a punishment for eating without permission. But he only smiled and motioned for her to try. Her first bite sent juice running down her chin, and she gasped at the sharp, delicious sweetness. He laughed softly and wiped her chin with a gentle swipe of his thumb. "There's more where that came from," he promised. She finished the whole container in shy, grateful bites, her glow brightening each time she looked up and saw him watching. As they traveled under the moonlight, she pressed her face to the window, marveling at every tree, every distant light, every new shape on the horizon. To her, it all felt like a dream where she was free and loved, and no one would ever lock her away again. At dawn, they reached a small, hidden settlement nestled against a cliffside, far beyond the Empire's watchful gaze. Humans stepped out of simple houses, their eyes widening when they saw her. She shrank back instinctively, her glow flickering in fear. But he held her hand firmly and stepped forward. "This is Glow," he announced, pride ringing in every word. She's family now." The other humans looked at her for a long, silent moment. One by one, their expressions softened. A woman stepped forward first, carrying a bundle of warm clothes. Another offered a steaming mug of tea. A child peeked out from behind a wooden fence, wide-eyed and curious. Slowly, hesitantly, Glow stepped forward. When the woman draped the new clothes over her shoulders, Glow shivered but did not retreat. The fabric felt like a soft hug, something she had never known she needed. The humans guided her to a small house on the edge of the settlement, built from smooth stone and wood that smelled of earth and sunlight. Inside, there were small carved decorations, handmade blankets, and pictures of smiling faces pinned to the walls. She stared at everything, touching each object as if it might vanish if she blinked too long. He stayed close, watching her reactions with quiet joy. "This is your home now," he said softly. "If you want it to be." Her throat tightened so painfully that she could barely breathe. Home. The word echoed through her like a new heartbeat. That night, she lay curled in a real bed for the first time, wrapped in blankets that smelled of flowers and soap. She trembled under the weight of everything: the warmth, the softness, the simple reality of safety. He sat beside her, gently stroking her hair. When she finally fell into a deep sleep, Her glow pulsed steadily, a soft moonlit halo that filled the small room with quiet light. In her dreams, she flew again, but this time she wasn't alone. He was there beside her, soaring through the clouds, their laughter rising higher than the stars. Days turned into weeks. Glow learned how to cook small meals, how to plant flowers in the little garden outside, and how to mend tears in clothes. She watched the other humans, learning their ways and their quiet rhythms. Sometimes she would wake up in the night, heart pounding in fear that it had all been an illusion. But every time, she would find him sleeping nearby, a hand resting on her blanket as if to reassure her even in his dreams. She began to explore the forest around the settlement, her wings now strong enough to carry her from tree to tree. Children would chase after her, laughing as she swooped low and let them touch her glowing fingers. She taught them small words in her original language, the ones she had been forbidden to speak back in the Empire. They loved the strange, melodic sounds, repeating them with bright giggles. One morning, she found a small mirror in her room and spent hours staring at her reflection. She traced the contours of her face, her shimmering blue skin, the new strength in her eyes. For the first time, she didn't see a defect, she saw someone beautiful. Someone real. When he came to check on her, he found her sitting quietly with tears streaming down her face. Alarmed, he rushed forward, but she only reached for his hand and pressed it to her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me." His own eyes grew wet as he kissed her forehead, pulling her into a trembling embrace. "Thank you for surviving," he murmured against her hair. Later that week, Glow gathered the courage to ask him if they could visit the highest ridge beyond the settlement. He hesitated at first, concerned for her safety, but she insisted. She wanted to show him something. Together, they climbed as the sun began to set, painting the sky in waves of violet and gold. At the top, she turned to face him, her eyes shining brighter than the evening stars. She spread her wings fully, now powerful and graceful, each feather catching the last rays of light. Then, she stepped forward and jumped into the sky. He gasped but didn't move, trusting her completely. She soared above the ridge, weaving and turning, leaving trails of shimmering glow that lingered like fireflies. When she finally landed in front of him, she was breathless, laughing, her eyes wide with exhilaration. "I can fly," she cried, tears glimmering on her cheeks. "I can really fly." He stepped forward, his own face radiant with pride and wonder. "You always could," he said softly. "You just needed someone to believe in you first." She threw her arms around him, pressing her forehead to his. In that moment, they both felt something bigger than words, a connection stronger than any bond forged in laboratories or on battlefields. The Empire had called her defective. They had tried to bury her light under layers of fear and pain. But he, a simple human with rough hands and a gentle heart, had looked past all of it and seen a miracle. In the following months, Glow's story spread among the settlement and beyond. Humans who had once been wary of hybrids now welcomed them, inspired by the glow they saw in her eyes. She became a symbol of hope and rebirth, a living testament to what could bloom when compassion overcame cruelty. As more hybrids arrived, hiding and running from the Empire, Glow took them under her wing, literally and figuratively. She taught them to speak, to cook, to laugh. She showed them how to mend their broken wings and how to fly again. Each time she watched one take off into the sky for the first time, she felt her own glow pulse stronger, a constant reminder that miracles could grow anywhere, even in the darkest places. Years later, when she stood beside him at the edge of the same ridge, now surrounded by a flourishing community, she pressed her hand into his and whispered, "Thank you for saving me." He shook his head, smiling through tears. "No," he said softly. "Thank you for saving all of us." And together they watched as new wings rose into the sky, slicing through the golden sunset, leaving trails of light and laughter echoing among the clouds. Glow closed her eyes, feeling the wind rush over her face. She was no longer defective. She was no longer a number. She was Glow, a miracle born from love, from kindness, from humanity's greatest strength. And in that endless, burning sky, she knew she would never fall again.